welcome everybody. Thanks again to everybody for participating in 1455's second annual Summer Literary Festival. We're glad to have you tonight, and we hope you will spread awareness about the festival by talking on social media, liking the 1455 Facebook page, signing up for the newsletter. For some of our authors, you can find more of their work available for purchase via the links on the agenda page of the LitFest website. All purchases will be shipped directly to your door. And the Potter's House is the partner this year for 1455. They're a nonprofit bookstore, cafe, and event space in Washington, D.C. with a deep history of social justice and community building. And you can learn more about their work at www.pottershousedc.org. So, again, we remind you that the sessions are interactive, so use the chat room to submit questions. Not all of us are as technically competent as others, and Holly Karapetkova has offered to handle the Q&A for us in the chat. So thank you, Holly, because that has made my life considerably easier. So again, welcome everybody. My name is Katherine Young, and I am the editor and compiler of the forthcoming print anthology Written in Arlington. It was supported by an individual artist grant from Arlington County. I need to say that. We appreciate that, Arlington County. We in Arlington County in the poetry world have been engaged in a 2-year struggle to make sure that the literary arts are receive continued funding. They were cut from the funding in the county budget in 2018. We've gotten our poet laureate position back. I'm very happy to say that Holly is going to be our new poet laureate. And we want to keep that literary arts programming coming, and so we need to say thank you for when they actually support the arts, which is what they have done with this anthology. Now, in addition to the written anthology, Written in Arlington, there is a companion digital anthology that's part of the project, but tonight we're going to be talking mostly about the print anthology. So I am joined tonight by Arlington poets Aaron R. Aaron, you want to wave? By Katherine Gekker, by Holly Karapetkova, whose name I mangle every single time I say it. I'm sorry, Holly, will you say it right? Okay.
Yes, you're great.
Okay, by Martha Sanchez-Lowery and Michael A. Schaffner. So first I'm going to start with just a few words about the anthology. We have 70 poets and 150 poems. The poems were originally written in at least 4 languages: English, Spanish, Russian, and Hindi. When I sent out the call for submissions, I had no idea what I was looking for, and no idea what I was going to get. What I ended up with, I mean, I had thought at one time of doing a sort of historical anthology, all the poets I could ever associate with Arlington County going back a long time. That got very problematic because Arlington has only been a county for the last 100 years. And we actually had some poets before that. But it hasn't been well populated until the second half of the 20th century. So in any case, what I ended up with in terms of the poets in this anthology are poets who currently live, work, or spend significant time in Arlington, or poets who had some significant prior connection to Arlington. And almost all of them are contemporary or recently deceased. We had a number of poets who didn't quite fit into this grouping who lived in Arlington in the middle part of the 20th century. For example, Tim Dlugos, who grew up and went to Bishop O'Connell High School here in Arlington. But his real poetic flowering was as part of the post-Stonewall generation in New York City, and many of his poems have to do with the AIDS era. And so they aren't terribly closely associated with Arlington. Now, not all the poems, even the ones in the anthology, are explicitly about Arlington, but they all have to do with the experience of being here, with our landscape, our many communities, from schools to churches to the Arlington Detention Center to Arlington Cemetery. The anthology will be available in print later this fall from Paycock Press, which of course is run by Richard Peabody, a native Arlington poet who also has some poems in the anthology. And it's divided into a number of thematic sections. And nobody on this panel tonight, and nobody other than Richard Peabody actually has spent much time with this anthology, so roll with me here. But the first of the sections is about the Potomac River and the role of the river in our lives. And so I thought we would start with a poem about the river. This is from a recently deceased Arlington poet, the late Karen Wood, a wonderful poet. And it's going to be the first poem in the book, and it's called First Light. At this hour, Who could discern where land ends, or water, where creek becomes bay, bay becomes river, and stretches across to a blue verge of Maryland, all the way black now, invisible. Through July's haze, the first light is a brushstroke of gray seeping in. Ducks totter up the beach, short bow-legged sailors. Over the water, duck blinds loom as improbable creatures who graze a pale field. From the marina around the bend, two crabbers set out. Their diesel chugs reverberate as prows cut new waves. Mockingbirds swoop, flash their shoulders like women advertising summer dresses. Herons cast themselves down. What matters? At the end, we become what we have loved, each thing that transfixed us in the rapture of its moment, its grace of its own making, ours the same. We grow around the land as it grew around us, and dawn crosses over us, whether asleep in nests or births or in the ground becoming life again. Here is the moment, here, among herons, ospreys, morning, river. I believe in this light. It is the light of the world. So the first poet I wanted, yes, I know, wonderful poet, a member of the Monacan Nation. We have actually a lot of links to Native American poetry in this community, and Karen was almost a lifelong in Arlington resident and left far too soon. So the next poem, also about the river, is going to be from Martha Sanchez-Lowery. In fact, two poems about the Potomac and the landscape of Arlington. Marty was born in La Paz, Bolivia. She is the author of Boca Negra. She has lived in Arlington for many years, although she's not here anymore. We miss you, Marty.
I know, miss Arlington.
And Marthy also has a special place in Arlington's poetry history because she was the executive producer for the two Poetry Alive at Iota CDs. Of course, the Iota Poetry Series is long gone, alas, but for 23 years, Miles David Moore coordinated that series and really gave a home to so many Arlington poets just coming up or established, but it was our poetry place. So, but we have the CDs thanks to Marty, and we also have these wonderful poems in this anthology. And I was going to ask you first to read Marking the River, please, Marty.
Okay, sure. What you should know about this is that I went to Washington Liberty, now Washington Liberty High School, and we had a crew team, but I used to skip school a lot and go to Georgetown and sit on the other side looking at the river as well. So it's spring. Marking the river. School is a river, daydreaming out of tall windows, a cross-eyed watch of the silver flowing still. Your mother thought you a little slow, but learning was a wild place on the river's edge, where you set feasts of honeysuckle on broad green leaves, till they called you late from recess, back to the map-making, charting, and intoning of river thought. Then the run home in the river-making rain, hail and thunder defiant, watching the river-making that ran between cobblestones. Late and much later, there is spring snow, petal pink, drifting on the road, borders of shameless color, sloping away from the embankments, and the river is now marked by wires and silver flags, marked for a river race, and it is a known place that you could mark yourself in that same way, single skull cutting the water, so close to the mark and going forward faster than the river itself. Thanks.
Thank you, Marty. And also luminous green rooms, which I'm not sure it has to do so much with the river, but the thought of a luminous green room seemed to go in that same sort of notion of outdoor, indoor, and how much the landscape matters to us. So maybe that one as well.
The luminous green rooms was inspired. I lived in California for 15 years, and every year I would come home in the summer. I could never go to Europe or anywhere else. I always had to come home to visit family. And I would come up Spout Run, and the trees would just be so lush, and they always seemed like a welcome room coming home. So this is in a car. It's taking place in a fast car. Luminous green rooms. In that luminous green room, it is the everyday, the banded day, the swerving on the road day, intergenerational transnational mallards and Canada geese crossing the interstate. In the glass, the flickering green and blue, and the awe. Was this here years ago? Was this yesterday? That you are here, that you do everything here, that you put on your mascara routine, that you sing intensely off key in this intimate space of speed and direction. And at a light, like all natural surprises, an old millionaire you happen to know is reading in his car, watching the lights turn red to red to red, his Hunter Oldsmobile rusting, and you surprise the loneliness there, a cat on your neck, 6 rose bushes in the back seat, and the dirt of a busy life, cellophane and yellowing magazines on the floor, stopped at that red light, your life visible, your everyday, moving so fast.
Thank you, Marty. One of the early poems in the book is by Kim O'Connell, and I'm not going to read it tonight, but the poem takes place as an airplane arrives at Washington Reagan Airport, coming down the rapids from Roslyn, and something of that journey into Arlington. And actually, there's several poems in the book about the journey into Arlington, so I also see in your work some of that. A lot of on the riverbank, and then immediate transition into, I think, falling down houses and sort of the streets of Arlington. It's almost a video compression in the poems, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that sort of indoor outdoor and the moving between spaces.
I've always loved Arlington. Well, let me put it. In high school, I fell madly in love, and the love of my life, who ended up dying as a senior in high school. But he would take us hiking to all these different parts of Arlington that we have that lead to the river. And when we first came, we lived in a house that was right behind a creek, and so you would play in the creek, and so. Arlington surprisingly has so much nature. There's just so many parks. There's the beautiful rose garden, and so everywhere you go, you encounter nature. And having come from Bolivia, even though we have this amazing Amazon basin area, La Paz itself, where I was born, is very stark, there's not a lot of trees. It's all eucalyptus, and so the lushness of Arlington has always been with me. Like I said, when I lived in California, at the time people weren't in gardening. They actually cemented the streets. There were no trees in San Francisco. Now it's all very different, but that was the thing that the river, the water, and the lushness of the South, you're sort of on the edge of the South, the magnolia trees, the smell of jasmine, and just, the beauty.
There's some inside, outside, living in both spaces, very much so. And certainly in the poems, I get the sense of the moving in and out, and the landscape as part of the interior as well, as part of your interior scape, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right. So as well as the, shall we say, green outside, we also have a real urban landscape in Arlington. And of course, maybe the most iconic portion of that is Roslyn, or at least was for such a long time, until the buildings went up in other places. And I wanted to read a poem in the anthology specifically about Roslyn. There are a number of them, but this one is by Amy Young, and it's called Smile, This Could Be You, Could CUD. Just past the Kiss and Ride at Wilson Boulevard and Fort Myer Drive, a woman sits. This is her job. She shows up every day. The walk signal ticks. She sits, hopeful with a cup, a can. Below ground, the metro rumbles. This woman sits. This is her job. Every day, she shows up. She is dependable, a mom. Her flap of cardboard tells me so. She shows up. She sits. Some days, the words change. The words change. She shifts her hips. This woman is so reliable. Even in the rain, she shows up. People know her. They stop and chat. A large American flag flails against concrete and glass. She is a fortress. She shows up every day. Every day she sits. This job requires fortitude. It is a full-time job. Sometimes the words change. Again, Amy Young, Smile, This Could Be You. And aside from Roslyn, of course, we have many neighborhoods in Arlington. One of them is Westover. It's one of the beloved neighborhoods of Arlington. And for some reason, it generated more poems than any other neighborhood in this anthology. I want to read one by Madeline Rosenberg. This one is called Ayers, after the hardware store that anybody who lives anywhere near Westover has visited many, many times. Ayers by Madeline Rosenberg. The man says, I can probably find the Holy Grail in here if I look hard enough. But he is neither religious nor an archaeologist. And he finds instead an egg timer, molly bolts, copper pipes, a batik scarf that would never be mistaken for a shroud, plaster of Paris, mousetraps, baseball bats, suet, a mason jar that will store brandied peaches too fermented to eat at some anonymous supper. He leaves with seeds and a vow to dig. Again, Madeline Rosenberg, Ayers. I'm going to read one more urban poem of Arlington. This is by the late Carol Heller Nation, who used to work for the Arlington County itself. This one's called Neon Rain at Midnight. My favorite intersection on rainy nights is Lee Highway at Spout Run Drive, where blooming Bradford pear trees glow ghost-like under streetlights as the road plunges into midnight. And neon lights on the corner pawn shop splash images of blue and rose guitars across shimmering wet black pavement to the rhythmic flash of traffic lights in bursts of red and green and gold. As the drugstore's open all night sign beckons in red beyond the parking lot, empty save a solitary police cruiser and rainbow colored pothole puddles, pretty as a painting on black velvet. All right, Carol Heller Nation. So one of the resources I used to find poems about Arlington was the online archives of the Moving Word competition, which goes back a long time, over 20 years in Arlington. And those are the poems, you may have seen them on the buses. They're very short, I think 10 lines at the maximum. And so here is a winning poem from 2008 by Natalie Lebeau. Washington and Lee Highway, rush hour. Red brake lights, March, rain, cold. And the boy is honeyed, a tight green bud, a stamen, pistil, all things growing. Past concrete, barrier, hubcap, the median meadow holds poppies in July, August, honeysuckle, black-eyed. The boy is lavender, aster, high goldenrod, a nest of bees. And again, Washington and Lee Highway, Rush Hour by Natalie Lebeau. Another quick one from the Moving Words, because I fell in love with this poem. This is by Deanna Derrico, who lived for a long time in Arlington. She's now elsewhere, but this is Diary of a Bad Housewife from 2002. She spread herself so thin, there wasn't enough wife left to butter her husband with. Deanna Derrico, Diary of a Bad Housewife. There are a lot of poems about relationships in this book, not too many love poems, but there are many about pain and broken hearts. And here is one about one of those. This one is by Juwan Threat, and it's called Hello. Hello to the child I never met, the one taught love, that learned self-respect. Hello to the child that never knew violence, wasn't taught to be a man, that he had to keep it silent. The one that didn't lie awake every night on an empty stomach, hearing foster parents fight. The one that didn't fear his bedroom door would open, has never been the victim of hate and emotions. The one that didn't wake up with bruises on his skin, didn't lie to his teachers and say he fell again. Hello to the child that can hold his head high, has never been molested, therefore he kept his pride. Hello to the child that was taught how to dream, instead of being broken, belittled, demeaned. The one that had hope, the one that had friends, the one that didn't try to take his life in the end. Hello to the child, the one I never got to meet. Hello to the child that wasn't me. Juwan Threat, hello. So, speaking of poems about pain and suffering, Aaron R., who is here tonight, has a very timely poem about illness. Aaron has lived in Arlington since 2009. His poem, Hunger Pains, was winner of the inaugural World Food Day Poetry Competition, sponsored by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Congratulations, Aaron. And his book, Poetically Correct, Volume 1, is currently available online. He also edits, directs, and produces his own poetry videos. And this poem that he's going to read for you tonight is also in part of the video archive of Spoken in Arlington, which was not available yet online, but will be I hope when the book comes out later this fall. So Aaron, how about Darkest Days and Loneliest Nights, a pre-COVID poem?
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here with everybody tonight. So hope you all are staying well during this pandemic and everything going on. On my darkest day, on my loneliest night, on my knees I pray that I'll be all right. Is this the end of day? Will I ever get to see light? Praying to hear God say, my son, you'll be all right. I'm not worried about girls. I'm not worried about having fun. I just want to have a healthy day because so far I've had none. The things I thought that mattered, all like a mirror have shattered. I feel like I'm just stuck, dealing with all this bad luck. Thoughts about giving up, thoughts about giving in, feeling like I've had enough, but I know that I can win. If I just stay strong, there's light ahead in the tunnel. All I gotta do is just hold on. Yeah, just stay strong. On my darkest day, on my loneliest night, on my knees I pray that I'll be all right. Is this the end of day? Will I ever get to see light? Praying to hear God say, my son, you'll be all right. I'm not worried about wealth. I'm just worried about health. Those material wishes can all get stuck on the shelf. I'm just worried about self. I'm not worried about anyone else. This is a pain I've never felt. Guess this is just a hand that I've been dealt. But there's a reason to it. Gotta find a silver lining. It's a season to it. God is doing some designing. Maybe it's refining to a cleanser's soul. I'm still in my youth, getting encouragement from the old. That I'll be strong again, yeah. That I'll be me again, yeah. Keep him on my side, and I'm destined to win. My thoughts went dark and I can't figure me out. Tears in my eyes as I replied. And this is what it came out. On my darkest day, on my loneliest night, on my knees I pray that I'll be all right. Is this the end of day? Will I ever get to see light? Then I felt God say, my son, you're all right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. You want to tell us any more? People can't see the video. I've seen the video. The video was actually shot as if is it in a real hospital?
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, I had like a 4-year string of just stomach pain where I was just hospitalized and the hospital would send me home and then I would end up right back. Nobody could really ever figure out what was going on and I couldn't either. And so because it happened so often, I think one of the things that I kind of tried to take from it was maybe I'm going through this so that I can send a message to other people. And one of the things I just decided to do one of the times was that once I got on my medication to feel good, I was just going to record the experience. And that's kind of what the video is about. And then once that happened, I just realized there's a lot of people, especially in these times, that are sick and going through things and want to give up. And I was definitely at that point. And just through prayer, you know, eventually I got over it. I haven't been sick since then, thank God. And that's kind of what made me make the video.
No, and it's just the perfect, I mean, alas, right? But it's the perfect poem for right now, you know,
Right.
for people who are suffering so badly in this community and elsewhere. Definitely. Thank you. So the next section of the anthology goes into poetry and storytelling, and then we go into a section of sort of history, a history of Arlington. There's a lovely poem from Phyllis Wax that takes us back to the post-World War II era in Arlington, which is when Arlington's population exploded. And this one is called What We Saw. When we went downtown in the 1950s, veterans of the war were among us, living reminders. On the sidewalk on F Street, on a board on wheels, a legless man held out a metal cup. Inside Hecht's department store, we tried not to stare. A man with a 3-pinchered steel claw where his hand should be was making a purchase. Even in school, our math teacher, leaning against his desk, absent-mindedly tapped a pencil on his outstretched leg, wood against wood. War slapped us across the face wherever we looked. And of course, as you might expect in an anthology about Arlington, there are a lot of poems about Arlington Cemetery. I think some of you have written some. Here's one from a visitor to Arlington. I really was happy to have this poem because this is sort of, you know, we in Arlington see tourists come all the time. Well, here is one of the tourists and he's writing about his experience. This is by Lyman Grant and it's called Tourist Trade. After a long, long day of reminding ourselves about what being an American is supposed to mean, you know, the memorials to war dead, museums with famous painted heads, the chunks of stone carved with fragments of half-forgotten speeches from time's retreat, we crossed back over the river, Lincoln illuminated, and turned away to the rebellious state, tired, cold, hungry, huddled in our Ubered SUV. Stop here, my daughter-in-law commands, as we round a hill. We need snacks. Never surprised at the caprice of citizens, our driver keeps the car warm for my wife, shamed by our deplorable appetites, while the rest of us invade Fort Myer Market and fill plastic bags and our underfed imaginations with cheap California Merlot, Hot Pockets, Cool Ranch Doritos, and Ben & Jerry's Americone Dream. With a sigh, our driver asks if we are done, and taking the long way, determines to drive us past that statue from that old movie, the one with the people reaching toward the flag, and back to our sweets, purchased on credit and points. Lyman Grant, tourist trade. Of course, many of the people who come here as tourists or just come for a visit decide to stay here, and a number of poems in the anthology trace the immigrant experience. Marty Sanchez-Lowery, you have lived that experience, and you've written a poem called Walking an Immigrant's Arlington. Will you read that one for us?
Hey, thank you, gosh. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me here. 55 years ago, it's unbelievable. That's how old we are. Walking an Immigrant's Arlington. It is here we arrived with red check suitcases full of paintings and the Virgin. Art and faith survive it all. Alone, we survived that first unknown ice storm I had only seen capping our Andes, more crystal than cold. Our minds aflame because in those days they had made bonfires of the houses in the city, closed the bridges while intolerance exploded in the streets. Someone shot 3 great men in one historic blur, and we were now here. As people walked barefooted for and against need, crossing the same bridges that had seen Lincoln review the troops that united north to south. Those bridges I had crossed ever so slowly, admiring the golden lions on the edge of the afternoon, almost alive, guarding city and river. We lived near that sprinkling of white crosses, blocks and blocks of white interspersed with green, that place where we bear that generous notion of freedom, and in front of a pawn shop, by derailed roads that had grown wild with weeds, old canal trails, and it never occurred to me to take my topaz cross or any other jewel to that pawn shop, nor to dream that I wouldn't always have that overgrown field to play in. And what I remember is the silence, then and later, the wide empty roads that here too replaced what was green and flowering, the old abandoned wooden houses sleeping under the moss and near the river, that charm of a small town that grew unhinged and now begs for change at the post office, the constancy of the river and the bridge which still continues, dividing and separating north and south, this and that. All that was lost in the past, each day visited anew by someone creating memory, while I who arrived so many years ago saw it change slowly and in an instant. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. You know, I moved here in the 80s, and I have seen a lot of change in my time here as well. But I think, what was that, 65, 68 when you came?
65, January 10th, 1965, yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, it wasn't a small town then, but it was so different from what Arlington has become now.
Yeah, there was no Roslyn, number one. There was no Ballston. There was, it was just Parkington and nothing, but pawn shops in Roslyn. It grew completely.
And I remember the old Clarendon where there were just rows of antique shops where you could wander around all day. And of course, all of that is gone now too. I mean, it lost a lot of character, lost Little Saigon largely. So much of what made this community interesting and unique. It's different now. I guess you gain things, lose things. That's a constant. But speaking of Little Saigon and speaking of Vietnam, I want to turn now to our the person who hasn't read yet, Michael Schaffner, because he has something to say about the immigrant experience from a different perspective. Michael Schaffner is a retired civil servant. His publications include the novel War Boys and the poetry collection, The Good Opinion of Squirrels. I have read this collection several times looking for poems for the anthology. I did not know one can write so many poems about squirrels, but one can, and they're all pretty wonderful. Among Michael's other interests besides squirrels are Arlington and Civil War history. And I wanted to ask you, Michael, to read The Lees of Arlington, please.
I'm sorry, I don't have that anymore, and I'm not prepared to read it.
Okay.
I probably wouldn't write it now, but
that's okay.
I apologize.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's an interesting.
I have entirely different feelings about Robert E. Lee now that I've studied more Civil War history.
Just today they announced the public process is underway here in Arlington to rename Lee Highway. And so from
That's
Arlington.
true. That was named after him during the Jim Crow era. It was the Georgetown Fairfax Road beforehand. So
Right. And it was intended to go, it's a highway that goes all the way from New York to San Francisco, and the part that goes through the south is apparently Lee Highway. So, I mean, from Arlington House to our public schools, Lee is still casting a long shadow over Arlington. It's in Lee is in a number of poems in one way or another in this anthology. And it's something, we as Arlington residents are still coming to grips with. What is our history? What is the history that we want to preserve? What is the history that has been foisted on us or that we have chosen to accept as opposed to perhaps what we should have? I come from Prince Edward County.
One of the things I am doing now is spending an ungodly amount of time researching one of the 2 Civil War regiments that was raised in Arlington. And I think that the adoration of Robert E. Lee is one of the reasons I never learned about them growing up. That regiment is the 2nd United States Colored Troops. They didn't talk about them back then because they were Yankees and they were black. And so that's people talk about getting rid of statues or road names as erasing history. I could talk for the next hour about what kind of history they erased, and I'll not do that though. I do want to say, you talk about history on a different note. I moved here when I first saw Ayers, the inside of Ayers, when I was 7. I don't want to say how long ago that was. But if you're looking for the Holy Grail, the mistake most people make is going to housewares. You have to go in the back of hardware. That's where you'll find it.
That's where everything is? Okay. All right. Well, so I wanted to ask you also to read your poem, Islands of Arlington, Part 1, Hall's Hill, because that is also about sort of the history that we choose or choose not to preserve in this county.
Well, Hall's Hill is one of the traditional African-American communities in Arlington. And when I grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, et cetera, it was just kind of an uninteresting mystery. We didn't go there. Walking through it today, what impresses me is how deliberately engineered the surrounding neighborhoods that grew up around it were to isolate it. So that's the rest of the introduction that I originally had is actually in the poem. So I'll go to it. Islands of Arlington, Part 1, Hall's Hill. Hall's Hill is not easy to enter or leave. Where troops once camped before marching south, refugees from slavery created homes and wielded for a time a kind of power, now withered away in a history written largely as a street map of a maze. South of Lee Highway, west of Glebe Road, east of George Mason Drive, despite its closeness to 3 of Arlington's principal roads, Hall's Hill borders none. Its cross-street stop, just slightly beyond its jumbled core of bungalows and cottages slumped by time. The hospital blocks access to the west, just south of 19th, and that street, like 20th to the north, jogs a few houses to the left before picking up past Edison. 19th Road and 21st simply end. No roads lead to Glebe, only 2 pathways, one through Summers Park and one leading up to the cul-de-sac at 20th Road. Between them, privacy fences descend to 17th and Abingdon, and a stouter line of concrete, brick, and board. This is a so-called segregation wall, the bulwark of property values all around the interned community for years until Hall's Hill became desired. Not as it was, but as a blank slate developers could reimagine as appeals to the market's sense of highest value. So the homes of Hall's Hill now vanish, Reconstruction's evanescent dream, into a cancer of McMansions breeding neurofibromas of vinyl, taking a hope that endured since the Civil War, a coin that never gained currency.
you're
I can't
muted.
hear you.
You're muted, Kate.
I am sorry about that. Holly, so I know you have also written about the legacy of racism here and elsewhere. But I selected poems on a couple of different subjects for this anthology. I should introduce Holly. She is the author of 2 books of poetry, Toe Line, winner of the Vern Rutsala Prize, Poetry Prize from Cloudbank Books, and Words We Might One Day Say, winner of the Washington Writers Publishing House Prize for Poetry. So she lives in Arlington, teaches at Marymount University, and has just been selected as Arlington's 2nd poem laureate. So I was hoping you would read Sweat right now, which is about transition of various kinds.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for including me in this reading, Kate. And it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. Your poems are really gorgeous and inspiring. This poem is called Sweat. It's about a friend of mine who passed away actually very shortly after I moved to Arlington. And like the dead often do, he kept appearing and reappearing to me in dreams. And so this is about, and also in visions of other people. So this is about one of those moments. It's called Sweat. I saw you one last time standing on the corner of 26th and Old Dominion. You had become a woman with long red hair, thick and straight. But I knew it was you, still 6'2", the freckles on your face forming a pattern I'd recognize anywhere. We didn't talk. I was in the passenger seat of a car, windows rolled down to smell the spring blossoms. I wanted to stop and ask you what you could recall, pool our memories to make sense of what had happened. But I wasn't the one driving, and you were waiting for someone else. The breeze thick with the sweat of bees. The blossoms so full it would take weeks for the air to clear of their scent.
All right. Beautiful. And I'm going to ask you to read Donaldson Run as well, but I want to read one in the middle, because just as your poem is about transitions, the poems that follow it in the anthology are concerned with neighborhood and domestic life, but they're always dynamic and moving and in flux. And one of my favorite ones is Susan Greyfeld Long's Household Nocturne, which I also happen to think is about witchcraft. So I'm going to read this one quickly. This one's called Household Nocturne by Susan Greyfeld Long. I have gone to bed early in my white cotton gown, in which I am lonely but bright as bone on a sheet of X-ray film. In his small blue room, my young son is curled like nut meat into the folds of quilt, the black cat snoring at his feet. From the attic room come fragile la-la-las as my daughter practices her scales in front of a mirror. Somewhere downstairs, a spoon strikes a repeating metallic note against the inside curve of a kitchen bowl as my husband eats his ice cream and reads Dostoevsky. The quiet in the house has nowhere to go, so it becomes light and pools in the old wavy window glass. The widow next door has sculpted a totem of women to watch over her moonlit garden. Something of me is out there tonight, snout down, foraging through the pale cabbages.
Yeah.
Susan Greyfeld Long, Household Nocturne. So the last section of the anthology follows themes of landscape, nature, the seasons, time passing, and Holly's Donaldson Run is a part of this section. If you would read that, that would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for including this poem. It's about a very sort of brief and significant moment that I shared with my daughter on Donaldson Run Creek. Most of my parenting life has happened in Arlington. My son was 2 when I moved here, and my daughter was born here. So when I think of Arlington, I think of family and these kinds of moments. Donaldson Run. The day was not ours, but we were in it, up to our knees in the water of a small creek that feeds a famous river, one that touched the feet of men and women who went down in history. Perhaps they walked this small creek too, but it is not written. Likewise, our names are not in any book, but we write them on the rocks with water and leave before they evaporate. We take only things that have already fallen, dead leaves, the tuft of a dandelion blossom, and sail them downstream, watching until they snag on a stick or slip into the current. We are our own witnesses. No one sees this but us, not even the sun cooling its head behind a cloud.
Thanks, Holly. So the seasons. We are in the middle of summer now. We're about to turn to September. Of course, September has a specific resonance for people in Arlington. And Katherine Gekker, you have 2 poems in the anthology. At least one of them is definitely about September, and the other is perhaps a little bit later in the fall. Will you read for us September, Arlington, Virginia? Volume up. There you go.
I have to unmute myself, excuse me. And thank you, Katherine, for including me. I have been scribbling notes as I've been listening to all of you read. They're such incredible poems. Thank you. September, Arlington, Virginia. A long time ago, near the end, our old dog limped through fallen May apples beside Windy Run. Each night I brushed him, checked for new lumps, asked, "Is tomorrow the day?" His paws smelled like cider. That last day he stood still for a long time, looked toward children in the park, then followed me to the car. Each night I listened. Helicopters thumped up and down the Potomac. Fighter jets roared high, invisible, even when I could see the stars. When it rained, they sounded muffled, close. All night long, important people were making important decisions.
Thank you, Katherine. And also, overnight, maples turn into pumpkins.
Thank you. And like Marty, some of these take place right off of Spout Run. I lived in the Woodmont neighborhood for 20 years, and both of these poems were written while there. Overnight, maples turn into pumpkins, and the dog disappears for hours in his leaf-filled yard. Herds squirrels corner to corner. No acorn will be harvested on his watch. Too tired for his nighttime walk, he puts himself to bed at 8. Tonight the sun sets. Wasps race to their nest, angry that their time is almost over. 7 deer tiptoe single file from their feeding ground to their sleeping ground. A full moon shines silver on the batwing begonias. And then it happens. You are there. The dog, overjoyed, brings his ball, his stick, anything to keep you. It's like that other sunset. For a long time, you had been too ill to look out the window. Suddenly, you saw the tops of the oaks. They glowed yellow. You asked, "How can I bear such beauty?"
Lovely. Thank you all. Wonderful. I'm going to give Michael the last reading. It's not actually the final poem in the book, but it could be, Cherrydale et al. But before I let Michael read, I want to encourage anyone who is out there watching us tonight, if you have questions, we have a few minutes left. You can use the question and answer function. Let us know. Holly is going to look at that for us. So, Michael, Cherrydale et al.
I'm sorry about that other one. I apologize on about General Lee, but thank you very much for letting me read.
No. But I mean, General Lee is larger than life here, right? I mean, what can you do? He's in the poems, he's in the landscape, he's in the names. You know, until we come to grips with that as a society, he's going to be here. So,
yeah,
but now,
the way he was taught, he was sort of the Shakespearean tragic hero of Virginia history. And but yeah, let me find this other one. We were talking about old neighborhoods. I live in a house that was built cheaply 106 years ago, and I don't think we'll ever have it entirely fixed up. It was inhabited by 2 immigrants. They spoke German on the 1920 census. They were tenant farmers on the glebe estate.
Wow.
And it's a teardown, like most of the rest of my neighborhood. So this poem is called Cherrydale et al. Yesterday, the season changed a little sooner than expected. One wonders which warblers will find a new home. I haven't seen a possum since driving home from Loudoun County, back from farms that gave their names to corporate crossroads as produce stands grew into chains. But one should avoid nostalgia like favorite brands subcontracted into oblivion. I have a friend who sees everything from a condo at the top of Stafford and can tell you all we see from our porches survives only as a minor archipelago and a sea of change that rises at a rate we feel is glacial, though glaciers melt as fast as our history of forgetting.
Thank you, Michael. I want to ask in general, you know, all of us here are coming from different aspects of Arlington poetry. We're interested in different things. Where is Arlington going next in terms of poetry? We've lost Iota. We do have still a venue at Busboys in Shirlington, but we now have a new poet laureate. I assume there are going to be programs. Holly, if you want to spill any information about that, about what you're planning for us. But what are our options in terms of venues, and where should we be looking? I know, for example, that each of the 3 high schools is doing something distinctly different in terms of poetry. At Yorktown, they tend to be page poets. At Washington Liberty, they tend to do recitation poetry in some of the larger contests, nationwide contests. And at Wakefield, they tend to be spoken word and performance poets, 3 very distinct traditions in our high schools. And in fact, one of the Wakefield recent graduates, I think she was a 2018 graduate, went on to be on the DC Youth Poetry Team, Slam Team, and was the DC Youth Poet Laureate for a year. That's Anaya Smith. So we have a lot of up and coming poets in this community, but it sometimes seems like the north part of the county, as always, the north part of the county doesn't talk to the south part of the county, and we are in such sort of distinct islands. Does anybody want to address that question?
Don't forget Readings on the Pike too.
Yeah, absolutely, but Readings on the Pike, of course, is all different genres, not just poetry. Yeah. Anybody want to take a whack at that? That was a big question.
I'm waiting for the bars to reopen.
Okay. Well, you know, Susan Mokler, and I believe Susan was the guiding force, but was about to start a series up in the Dominion Hills in the Meridian Pint. And that was, the first of those was scheduled for late March. And of course, the epidemic derailed that. But are we all, I mean, I hope we're not always going to be doing Zoom readings. This is lovely to be with you all, but it's very disconcerting as a poet to not be able to get any reaction to what you're doing, to not see how your words are working, you know, in the crowd, and to not get that feedback. So, I mean, probably we'll be here for a while, but what do we need as a county? Maybe that's a better way to put it. What do we need for Holly to have? What kind of resources does she need as poet laureate?
Well, I mean, as you noted, it's a strange time to be in a public position of any type. And a lot of things are on hold because of the pandemic. And Zoom readings are not the same as actual readings. And I think I kind of get Zoom fatigue. I've been on here since 1 o'clock. I'm about to fall over. And we get kind of tired of these kinds of events, though they are really important. And this conference has been amazing. There's been some amazing events today, and it's really community building. And thanks to Sean for pushing forward and making this happen in spite of the pandemic. But we do have some interesting things coming, virtual kinds of things, collaborations across different arts that I hope are going to be interesting and exciting for people. But a lot of things are more challenging right now, or they're just going to be different. Getting together in person is just not an option, and that's maybe the best way to bring people together. I don't know. What do other people think?
Anybody?
I want to ask Aaron, I mean, I'm like the last person here to be talking about the future.
I mean, I think that probably, of course, these are strange times. So there's only so much we can do, but I think maybe taking advantage of these moments, because we, of course, don't know how long this is going to go on. And in the event that it does last throughout the rest of the year, for example, I think maybe the only thing we could do is maybe just continue to promote like social media type groups and facilitate things like this. Like, even though I think this is, of course, a special occasion, I think maybe just doing more frequent things for Arlington poets to get involved would be a way to just keep people connected in these times where we can't go to things like Busboys and Poets, for example. Because I think I have seen something with Busboys and Poets doing something like virtually where people just present that way. But, of course, like Holly said, it's not a usual time. So I guess that's pretty much what we can do, is just adapt to what people have, because a lot of people are in the house now and maybe they are more reachable than we think that they are.
Right, right. But I also, to Holly's point though, I mean, I am not on Zoom as much as she is, but I also get fatigued so quickly. I think, and there's not any audience energy. I mean, when you're performing, when you're reading live, you're interacting with people and you can feed off the crowd, and there is something that's almost intangible going on between you and the people around there. And when all you're seeing is the screen with your own face on it, it's not the same experience for the poet. And the other thing that I find is I can't read poetry sitting down. I have a really hard time with sort of just the body movement that I need to do the work that I want to do when I'm in front of a crowd. So I'm hopeful. I've been invited to a reading next week that is supposedly still taking place. We will see if they change that. Yeah. And I'm not sure I want to go. I think that's the real thing that we're all grappling with, right? Nobody wants to be sitting in front of a computer doing these readings. It's certainly not with this anthology coming out. Part of the point of the grant is to build community, the grant that supported the anthology. And the idea is to bring us all together. And we were supposed to have, as part of the grant, a giant party for all the 70 poets who are in the anthology so we could all come and meet each other. And it seems like that's probably not going to happen. So it's so disappointing.
I want to say that here in Alexandria, they've been advertising some really interesting things like yoga by the river, music in secret gardens, but for small crowds, like, 20 people, everything, laid out. Obviously, it can only happen while the weather holds. So the fall might be a really good time to have readings in natural settings, the rose garden. You have so many parks and, plazas where you could limit perhaps the audience and still have it be live. Because that was a really neat thing. It's like, oh, there's going to be 5 musicians and 20 people in this secret garden. It just seemed charming that it could happen. I don't know if they'll get everybody, but it was nice to think that it could happen.
Right. Jessica Haney, I was saying on the chat, thank you, Jessica. Hello, Jessica. That Fall for the Book has always had outdoor events under the tents. And I know the little bookstore whose name is escaping me in downtown Alexandria, the new one that's just opened up, they had an outdoor festival last year, but it was a tremendous amount of hard work for everybody involved with that festival. And of course, you never know weather, all that sort of thing. It's a really tough time for writers. I have several different books coming out this fall and next spring, and how are we supposed to promote them? Francisco is asking, what is the publication date of the anthology? It is supposed to come out in November. The book itself is still in design. I hope to have that within the next couple of weeks, and then it will go to publishing. And everybody if there's anybody in here who is a participant in the book, aside from our panelists, you will get galleys to look at some point early this fall. So we're very, very excited about it coming out. Again, our publisher is Richard Peabody at Paycock Press here in Arlington, and Arlington Press, one of the 5 or 6 presses that we have in Arlington. a place where there is so much going on in the literary arts. I think our time is about up, so I wanted to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the poets. These wonderful poems are going to be out for everybody to see if you want to taste. There are 31 of them that are currently available on my website, which is katherineyoungpoet.com. Look for the Arlington Anthology tab, and you can read more about the project as well on that website. For those of you who are watching, if I read your poem, thank you. Even if I didn't read your poem, thank you, because your poems are amazing. And I have to say, I am such a fan of this book. I am so excited for everybody to read it. You all are poets doing extraordinary things. And who would have thought a little local anthology would have poems from all over the world? We have poems from Siberia. We have poems from Australia. We have translations that Francisco Aragon has done for us from Spanish. It's just a marvelous collection of what we're doing in this community. And there is so much more going on that didn't even make it into the anthology. So there's room for anthology number 2. So again, thank you all for joining us, our panelists. Thank you, our audience. I am supposed to tell you that I'm supposed to remind you that all of the programming at the festival is free, so you can attend any and all other panels of your choosing tomorrow, and they will be putting together videos of each session on the 1455 website. They will be sending out email surveys after the event and welcome your feedback. And so finally, I need to say this because it's really important, 1455 has endeavored to make this event entirely free for everyone, but it's not free to produce. So if you like what you're experiencing and you want to help 1455 subsidize this and future events, please consider a tax-deductible donation via 1455litarts.org. Every penny will help 1455 continue providing awesome, inclusive, and free programs. Thank you to Sean Murphy, whose brainchild 1455 was, whose brainchild the festival was. Thank you all for being here, and until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you
All
for
right.
the anthology and for organizing this reading.
Thank
You've
you
done a
so much.
fantastic job.
Thank you.
Delighted to have you all here. Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.